So welcome back. We're looking forward, Be'ezus Hashem, to continue. We're holding on the end of 260 in the original text. Yes, we're at Chaf Avigeres HaKodesh, still that epistle. And I say still, we still have Be'ezus Hashem, Yisbarach Nagu to show quite a few classes on this Igeres. Now we did mention many times in this study of this particular epistle that it's not the regular. You can see the introduction of the previous and maybe the one before. This is not a regular Igeres, meaning to say that it's not similar at all to the entire Sefirot Tanya. It is deep, complex, nuanced, and when you open a Tanya, especially the first time, no one will ever recommend to start with the Igeres HaKodesh Chaf as an example. Maybe even other Igeres HaKodesh, even though there is an order of the study of the Sefirot Tanya. Interesting enough, there's different orders suggested. Many begin from the very beginning. Many would begin with Shaykh Emunah, because in the end of the day, Hashem Echad is really the premise of all our Avodah, that identification of the oneness of Hashem, Eined Mulvade, which tells us all what to do to serve Him. Explains us what sends us to Olam Hazeh with this important mandate to serve Him. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lasses Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachteinim, to establish for HaKadosh Baruch Hu an abode in this very physical world, which is all the message. And again, how we do it, how is a neshama connected with a guf and nefesh bahamis? A neshama doesn't come down to this world divested of body. No, it enters into a body, and a body which is bodily and inclines and gravitates to the bodily, to whatever contributes to its comfort, and of course that our good friend the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, which as it sounds is definitely gravitates to this which is animalistic, not necessarily bad or evil. It starts that way. An animal is quite a peaceful, particularly a domestic animal, but when you get in its way, it could start goring, this is what we're familiar with. Not necessarily nefesh bahamis is evil on its own. In the way it conducts itself, it's just animalistic. Whatever contributes to its comfort, that's what it does. Look at the animal. It sleeps and eats and scratches itself. It's just whatever makes it comfortable, that's what it does. And this is what we have within ourselves. Or the Nefesh Elokis is invested in, that is, and together with the Guf, we have yet a mandate, particularly to elevate and to refine, to domesticate more and more this Nefesh Bahamis, and eventually elevate it and transform it. Even the Nefesh Bahamis, even the evil side of the Nefesh Bahamis, which is the Yetzer Hara, right? We mentioned many times. I'll tell you, brilliantly called that other force of Nefesh Bahamis. It's just more a realistic approach and something which is easier for us to deal with as such. But nonetheless, there's the Ra as well. Like you say, even a domesticated animal, and get into its way, it could start goring. And goring is quite Ra because it does real damage. And so to the Yetzer Hara, there's the Ra behind the scene. Or someone, if you give in to that Nefesh Bahamis, to the animalistic covets, desires, and lusts, and so on, it becomes a slippery slope. And then there is no particular stop sign between this, which is just animalistic, and this, which is Ra, which is really evil. And therefore, the Yetzer Hara is really more of a stark name, a sharper name, a name which is more more threatening, if you will, because Elokus is Tachlis Hatayv, the ultimate good, and the Yetzer Hara associated with evil, true evil, especially particularly with the Alter Rebbe explains evil, Shos which we know that if Bahamis of the Yid, even his Yetzer Hara, is not totally. In the end of the day, that Ra is also a measured Ra one way or another, because we're talking about the Yetzer Hara of a Yid. And back to what we were just saying, that the Yid has the ability to transform this Yetzer Hara, like the Gemara said, it's a Mishnah Brachas V'ahav, does Hashem Alekecha, to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ishnei Tzarecha. Not only your godly soul could exercise this love, which is innate and inherent, by the Nefesh Elokis, but also the Nefesh Bahamis. And more so, the Yetzer Hara, Bishnei Tzarecha, could love Hashem, Yetzer Hara could love Hashem. Yetzer Hara is entirely all about being a hindrance and preventing the person to express their love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But this is a gift of davening, that it's a can come on board and not only not disturb the Nefesh Elikis in its full expression and manifestation of its closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, its love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but beyond that, we have the ability in the time of davening at least, and of course it has an impact in the entire day, the Yitzhar Hara Kulav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Mishnah, Bishnei Yitzarecha. So this is a whole, this is a sophisticated activity, if you will. This is a sophisticated mandate, and as we all know it, it looks so. It kind of maybe on paper looks simple, but we get onto the road, we get into the arena of our odyssey in Ilam Haza. It comes with many challenges, and the person has to come clean. We're meant to come clean after every day. We have to come clean in thought and speech and action, knowing that we did what we were supposed to do, and we stayed away with this which Hashem said not to do, not to speak, not to think, not to look, not to hear, etc., etc. So it is a complex Avodah. So this is where we have the Nilkuti Amorim, which tells us, which we call it many times, the perfect manual to Avodah Hashem, which is, of course, again, a sophisticated matter, a complex matter. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to do it, and of course He makes sure that it's very much doable. Like any responsible employer would never demand from his employee to do something which is impossible. But certain ideas are because you want to accomplish more, so this which you're working on would probably be a little more sophisticated, and in order for to get better results. You need this in a Neshama B'guf is definitely something as sophisticated, is a complex matter. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Betrunya in B'riyah Yosef, says the Medrash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Chazal tell us, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not come ask somebody Yid to do, or Am Yisrael to do something which is not doable. Of course, it's very doable, but nonetheless, you need a manual, and the Likutei Amorim is the perfect manual to our Avodas Hashem. We mentioned this many times. Again, you can see it. I think in the last class we pointed out. Of course, not Chas v'Shalom belittling any Gadol B'Yisrael which wrote a manual. They had one intention, to bring closer Yisrael Avim Bashamayim, Am Yisrael, to their Father in heaven. Which again, the only way is through Torah, mitzvahs, and Gemilas Chasadim, and Tefillah, and so on. But nonetheless, the perfect manual remains the Tanya by far. It's not something which is exaggerated or taken. It's just a matter of someone learn Tanya, and you'll understand it. It's not a matter of the semantics over here at all. Learn Tanya and learn it again, and absorb its message, Pedic after Pedic, Likutei Amorim. You'll come out on the other end a total different person in your Avodas Hashem. In your learning Torah, in your scrupulousness of Hashem's mitzvahs, your simchas chaim, simcha of life, simcha of avdus, not chas v'shalom, feeling the heaviness, even though it's irrelevant what a person feels like. But we are commanded, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Lo Makod Makriya Shema, says the Mishnah, to Shema. A person is mekabel himself L'Mach Shemayim. Not always we have to find ourselves in the perfect mood to serve Hashem, that we are meant to serve Hashem, even you're not in the perfect mood, of course. And that itself we appreciate from the lessons in Tanya. From the energy of the wording, famous Pedic Mem Aleph, the 41st chapter, even regarding Kabbalah's oil, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but throughout, everything becomes more rich. What he did was also, he showed us, he demonstrated to us the rich faculties which each one of us have, and how they could be aligned with our serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when you align your rich faculties with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you live a rich Shulchan Aruch life. You live a rich Jewish life. And again, we know that the system of the person is very complex and it's sophisticated. The whole human establishment condition is deep, and it's not just something. We're not robots, and it's very nuanced. Our whole system is very nuanced, and therefore to have everything about the Yid aligned with his mandate. His or her mandate is extraordinary, is extremely special and extraordinary. That's what the Tanya does. So learn Tanya, and you will attest to this on your own. So when we say Tanya, Likutei Amorim, Shaykh B'Emunah, Egeres HaTshuva, that's also a great place to start, right? Because we know that it says, Adam im kim kaparos in Ivra. We have to know there's always the opportunity to realign ourselves with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu at any given time. Any low davar she'ein lifnei HaTshuva, there's nothing which stands in the face, in front of tshuva. A person could always do tshuva. It's enormous centralistic message in our Avodas Hashem. Igeres HaKodesh, learn every single one. Each one of them will encourage you to do more and more, learn more Torah, do more mitzvahs. And in general, there's of course different Igeres HaKodesh. These are letters, right? They're not sequential. It's not one segment which the chapters are sequential. There are different letters written at different times, addressing different ideas, even though eventually they become timeless because of the letters of Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Alter Rebbe, particularly those Igeres HaKodesh who had entered into Sefer Tanya Kadisha. Alter Rebbe, of course, wrote so much more. They're printed Sfarim, Igeres HaKodesh of the Alter Rebbe, but these entered into Tanya, and again, not arbitrarily. There is Hashgacha, but again, there's not only the Hashgacha Elyono, there was a reason, the Bnei Agoyin HaMachaber, the Alter Rebbe's children eventually placed these Igeres as part of Sefer Tanya Kaddish, which has five segments. This is a Teresh B'Ksav, a Teresh Chassidus. We also mentioned this quite a few times, and so of course it becomes timeless. But nonetheless, it's to say no one's going to say start with Igeres HaKodesh Chaf, for sure not, because it is deep. It's different. We mentioned again, there's two chapters similar like that. One Igeres HaKodesh Chaf, and one in Kuntras Achrin, which is the final segment. A similar idea. It's long and it's deep and it's detailed and so on. So we give this introduction, and we mentioned we're going to do this every time, especially for the newcomers. This is different, but it's part of Sefer Tanya Kadisha, and we're learning it, and we're going to go through it, and it's going to take a long time. This is going to be the most classes up till now for sure, in comparison to any other chapter, by far probably. But we're going to go through it. We're not going to rush. As much as we can learn every single day, as much as we can achieve in the amount of text we cover every single class, that's what we're going to do ad Gemina till we finish Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach and Akut Shah. So we're holding in Umagam. Now, to see the previous class, I believe this is the 9th class to see the Igeres HaKodesh, its message. Wherever you're learning Tanya, wherever you're watching, but we do mention the original website of this class, tanyaonline.com. Tanya Online, one word, simple, tanyaonline, one word.com. There you have also all the previous classes and the Qumran, and for that matter, the entire Sefer Tanya up till now, to what we learned till now, which we merited. We had the schus to learn the Kuti Amarim and Sharich Bemuno, Igeres HaTshuva, and until Igeres HaKodesh Chaf, and you have all those classes all the way to from the very beginning. But it goes from top to bottom, so it's easier to access the very latter previous classes to have an idea of what we're talking about. And as we mentioned many times, it's not fair really to spend a lot of time in a present class with previous information, which today it's really just a click away. We do mention also there's the advantage of this very site, the scroll bar. The text is on a separate scroll bar. It's easier a bit to follow. But wherever you're learning Tanya, wherever you're watching Tanya, and you're able to zoom into this where we're holding at this time. So it's the fifth line from the bottom of 260. So magam kibriyas haneshamas mimeno li'yesh v'davar nimfniatz mabel mabriya. So if you remember in the previous class, Alter Rebbe points out the idea of malchus. Even though it's the end, it's the seif of the Sefirot, right? Malchus. But nonetheless, no, it's seif of mitchilas. So mitchilas, we're saying this, of course, very briefly. The end is wedged into the beginning, and the beginning and the end, and therefore Malchus has a certain advantage, even more than the other spheres. They're called Keser Milmato L'mayla. It's called the crown, because Ein Keser Ela L'melech, if you remember. The Melech is what wears a crown. Melech is Malchus. Keser is the crown, which is over everything. Quite literally, it's over everything. All the Keichas, all the Chochmah, Bina Das, it's on top. But the Malchus is what contains or identifies with the Keser. And therefore, Malchus has an advantage, Milmata L'mayla, over the other, its own previous spheres. And again, you could see it in the previous class. This was where we were coming from. And then, and as Alter Rebbe, Achrein the Ein Sof, Malchus the Ein Sof, It's called Keser Milmato Lamaila, similar to the crown of Keser over Atzilus. It's called Keser from Mato, from the below, to the on high. Again, you have to see the previous class. You can't infer the energy of the message just by these few words, but just to just identify with this which we left off with. So here the Alter Rebbe comes and says another, you're going to show you another koyach, which is precisely in Malchus, a certain potency, a certain koyach, and which is precisely Malchus, which the previous Sefirot don't even have. The koyach of birth, Leda. So, on the simple sense, when we think about Leda, anybody who navigates life and lives life, menschlich, and knows that we're always dependent in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if it's our parnasa, if it's crossing the street, or it's driving over to another area. In the end of the day, we always need Hashem's bracha and Hashem's hashgacha. Of course we do. How could it be different? But yet, there's certain occurrences in the life of the human being, as a healthy human being, and navigates healthily through Olam Hazeh, gets married, builds a family, responsibly, parnasa responsibly, and provides responsibly for his family, which is our mandate. Hashem wants a yid to live a life healthily and responsibly, and in every step of the way, of course, a healthy and honest yid would see, I'm doing mine, called hishtadlus. Hashem wants us to do our part, but we always know that if we're only honest, it's always, how do you say, we're simultaneously walking along with the bracha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For that matter, there's a word, even the kli which we made, our ishtadlus, is also because HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to be mishtadel. He establishes the kli for the parnasa. A famous expression. So the simple meaning is Hashem sustains you. Kalkala. But also there's a beautiful pirush. He makes the kli also. He's behind the kli also. He's behind the ishtadlus. But on the surface is, we're making the ishtadlus. That's the way they just set it up. It doesn't just appear that way. On one hand, it does, only in appearance, because everything is Hashem and Hashem is everything. But in the way Hashem created matters, there's something emes that we make our ishtadlus. And Eibishter, again, Hashgacha follows along, or we follow along, or simultaneously, our ishtadlus and Hashem's hashgacha in every step of our life. But every honest person will tell you, those times, those few moments, when my child was born, then I felt the overwhelming presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the whole phenomenon of Leida is an expression of the Ein Sof down here, the preparation, the perpetuation of one generation to another, to another, to another. To propagate, in other words, to continue to establish a family. The idea that we're the hemshech of one generation to the other. In the end of the day, it has an Ein Sofness to it. And besides, the whole idea of birth is something which is extraordinary on every simple level. And a healthy child comes with Ramachivorim, Shosagidim. The whole, and again, you can say it by every plant. You put a kernel in the earth, and then you have a whole bushel of kernels. Of course, it's also extraordinarily, and it's part of the wonders of nature coming from the wondrous HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof, so he could establish, put a kernel in, and you have a whole bushel of kernels. Will plant a little seed, and you have a beautiful apple tree. And apple trees in a few years, that is stupendous, of course. But nonetheless, by the birth of man, of human being, we see much more of the Ein Sof, because the human being is a sophisticated entity, and more is studied about the human being, particularly in the last few decades. More shed so much light on the grandness of the birth of a human being. So the whole idea of Leida is a clear manifestation of the Ein Sof in this world. The continuation, again, the idea of which is Ein Sof, means to say that there's a continuation. It doesn't stop. But the whole idea of birth itself is, of course, on its own a manifestation of Elam Hazard, that through marriage, a person through union, there is a full-fledged, healthy child. And any doctor, particularly in this area, will tell you more and more and more. I say this because of personal interactions, just a very casual, nonchalant type of conversation, and people who weren't even actually of any particular faith or something, not even Jewish, and just they were associated in this area. They were their vocation was particularly in the area not only of medicine but birth and so on, and just having a few minute here and a few minute their conversation from their perspective and point of view, they demonstrate the miracle, the absolute miracle which transpires when a healthy child is born. And there's so much to it. And much as we know, probably there's so much more we all don't know. But one thing we sense and we celebrate, this is an auspicious moment. This is a moment which you can't compare to any other experience one has as they travel through life. The time of birth, the phenomenon of birth. And why is it so? Because the truth of the matter is, it is a true manifestation of the Ein Sof, the connection of the Ein Sof down here. In other words, that the down here, the physical, the physical manifestation of it is it comes out in a way that you can see the Ein Sofness in this very unfolding of that birth of that child. That's why we stand in awe at the moments, particularly the moments of birth, the before, the after. It's a whole deal because it is a big deal, and it says in Svarim because it comes from a very, very deep level within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara says, Shloisha Maftechos, there's 3 keys which only the Eibishter holds. One of them is having children, as an example. And you're going to say that me crossing the street, it wasn't Hashem's decision that I should cross from one side to the other, okay? Or that I should go about my day and everything should be good. It's, of course, nothing happens other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is Hashem. What does it mean? This is the key to children, to birth, is in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we don't have to. We don't have to look deep to answer that question for real, because we know even in human conduct, there's certain things which are personal and things that are not personal. A person walks the street and a person eats and picks up a napkin. You don't. It's not something. Even though, again, as a honest human being, we should appreciate everything that goes on in life. Even having that simple meal or that simple snack, or the ability to make a bracha, or the ability to use a lavatory. That's why Dasher Yotzar, we say mafli lases. Yes, I just came out and I was able to succeed. And I'm healthy, and the whole idea, the way the Eibishter created human being. I make a bracha to say, and how does the bracha, the blessing conclude? Mafli lases. It's the most wondrous expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as an example. So we are meant to identify, especially this, which is, we can understand how things work, and of course we always attribute it, whoa, this is mafli lases of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're meant to. But nonetheless, in our life, there are different things. And not only in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in general, there's certain things which we do simply, and it's all us doing it. Like someone, for example, we gave the other day the example, a professor which was giving an essay. So he comes in and he takes up his coat and he asks his accomplice, hang up my coat. And 2 minutes later, he jumps right in, gets right into the depth of his essay. So if someone wants to repeat what this individual said, as an example, and they're asked to repeat it an hour later, what this individual said, no normal person is going to start from, oh, hang up my coat, and then the go on with the essay, just in repeating, because they were there and they experienced it, they heard it. That is, even though it says by Talmid Chachamim, it says Sichas Talmid Chachamim Tzichim Limud, but that's Talmid Chacham. But on the surface, no one's going to say that. And so, why did you skip the first part? It came from the same professor, and it came from the same vocal cords. He spoke those words. Why aren't you repeating it? Answer, because that's not who he is and what he stands for. That's not the pnimius of this professor. Everybody comes in, or they hang up their coat, or they ask someone to hang up their coat. Everybody does it. A simple person does that as well. It's not the inner workings of this professor. Therefore, when you repeat what this professor came to present, you start with the presentation itself. And really, this is just a simple example by all of us. There's certain things which are external and extraneous, meaning to say that it's not that significant. Everything's meant to be significant, not to lose focus. But in the end of the day, the way it is, and it's good. Not everything has to be a fuss made out of everything. And there's certain things a person goes about his day, and there's certain things becomes more important. And there's certain even the person's business. There's the regular day, and there's the important day, meaning to say that day, which is the day of that handshake, which we worked and prepared for 2.5 months, as an example. Today is the day of the handshake. Everybody's coming in with those papers and making sure that everything is checked, and every dot and every apostrophe and then the handshake, and you're going to say, well, it's the same person, and didn't he come yesterday to work, and 2 days ago to work, or 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, before even this deal came into the front, into the center of the success of that period, at least. They always came to work, and they always involved, and they're always honest with their time with the work, and they did everything right. So what's the difference? Yeah, of course there's a difference. Everybody's going to say there's a difference. It was more intensity. This is something more of everything about me was involved. My core was involved in that investment up to the handshake, and then the handshake itself, and then the alleviation, and then the celebration after. This is something which wasn't a regular day, even though it's the same person performing all the time in every area of life. And so too when it comes to Havla Kodesh Baruch Hu, of course he's conducting everything. But when it comes and every single detail of every experience that we experience as human beings, even. But could you compare that to when Hashem to things when we say, in other words, everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course. Everything is b'hashgacha pratis, with divine providence, and again, detailed divine providence, understandably so. But you can't compare. When the Gemara says, rather, there's certain things which are the only one who has the keys, the mafatechot, are in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is something very personal, and this is something very pnimius within HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And when you talk about pnimius within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which Hashem is Ein Sof, meaning to say that this mafteach, this key, is a manifestation of the pnimius of Hashem, of the pnimius of the Ein Sof. And therefore, Leida, birth, the reason why we look at it this way, we experience it this way, even our human mind and our human approach to it, say, whoa, this is not regular. This is something, if we're only honest, a full blast manifestation of the Ein Sof, the birth itself, the phenomenon of birth. The answer is because these are they're within the only ones who have the keys, right? You have the key to the safe. Is within the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, means to say those keys are an expression of the most pnimius, the dimensions within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We talk about Hashem, it's the Ein Sofness, which is imbued, which is embedded in these keys, because they are associated with the pnimius, right? The keys to the safe, it's delicate, associated with the pnimius. This is what a person has in mind throughout even the day itself, that this is the keys to that treasure, or similar. Because this is associated with the pnim of the human being. This is associated with the deepest parts within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the reason why they manifest in this way, that even the human approach is, whoa, this is very different. And we don't just say, okay, what time is it? I'm giving birth in 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the bank thereafter, or something. No, it's celebrated. Actual celebration as well. But we're talking about the idea of celebrating, because this is a total manifestation of the Ein Sof down here in this world. The fusion of the pnimius, of the unadulterated purity and Ein Sofness, infiniteness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Eilam Hazeh. It connects with that experience of Leida. So, and in terminology of Chassidus, comes from Atik. Atik is an area which is totally transcendent. And we're not going to go into the class right now, the whole idea of Atik. Atik is part of the Keser dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We know in Keser, crown, transcendent, right, over the head, meaning to say it's over, beyond Seder Ishtalshalos, even over Elam Atzilus. But there's Arich, known to be Arich, which literally means long, which is in contrast to the midas of Atzilus, which is the first formal world. Elam Atzilus, there's midas are called Ze'erampin, small faces. Arich is called Arichampin, large. But of course, it's figurative, and it's explained in Zayir and Kabbalah and Chassidus, because everything is vast. It's not limited. It's not a midah the way we know it in Elam Atzilus, which we don't know nothing. But the way it's known about it is midah. It's measured, and there it's arich, it's beyond, because it's part of the kesser, it's part of the Ein Sof, but there, in the end of the day, it's called the Reish Line'etzalim, where Atik is safe of the Ma'atzil, of the emanator. Atik is, literal translation, Atik, it's removed. Maitik Horim, it's removed, it's totally removed. It's part of the Pnimis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the idea of Atik. It's transcendent. As an example, Kriyas Yamsuf, famously, it says in Kabbalah, came from an area of Atik. And we saw it actually in Pshuta Shamikra, in the simple, in the verse rather, in Teira Shabiksav, that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, they start praying, they start doing everything what people do when they need to elicit an important blessing. Because Baruch Hu here, they needed a very important blessing because Baruch Hu, because Pari was after them with a passion of a vengeance and Chas v'Shalom to do everything. To charge Am Yisrael, they needed help. They started doubting. Hashem says, "No, this is coming from a different area." Tacharishun, atem tacharishun. You got to be silent. It's no matter what. Dabel b'nei so, as it says, because this comes from Atik. It's not an area where you can interact with, which means when you could interact with an energy, is because there is a comparability between you and the energy. If not, there's no way you can interact with that energy. Look at two parties. It's because there is a certain comparability between you two. Therefore, you can interact between each other. So even on high, the deepest levels, at the very deep level, where the blessing comes from, there's ways to interact, and this is the whole phenomenon of prayer. Atik is netak. It's removed from that. It's part of the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem tells Bnei Yisrael, no, there's no idea of prayer over here, because that doesn't reach Atik. We're going to perform a miracle which is beyond the norm. This is one of the most historical miracles of all times. The splitting of the sea, 2-3 million people crossing at the same time, 10 perfect paths. And it was dry and it was pleasant. The Gemara says that it wasn't even mud. Everything from the sea to people crossing, it's probably messy, muddy, but it's good because you save your life, save the life of a nation, for the continuation of the nation. It's miraculous on its own. But the Gemara says it was beyond that. It was pleasant. They were crossing a beautiful garden, and all that happened in seconds. This is not a regular miracle. This is a super type of miracle, which is again Kriyas Yabs, of the splitting of the sea. And super type of miracles don't come from the regular. Those handshakes don't come every day. It's something special. That took the business to another state, another level. And these things can happen periodically, but there's the important time. When every honest businessman says, "Oh, that was the time when we crossed into a different level, a different state." But you went to work every day, and you made it happen every day. No. There was that time which I'll never forget, that day and that handshake. It's a person like that because it comes from a very deep. There's certain things a person doesn't forget throughout his entire lifetime, like a miracle would happen to them, as an example. Something extraordinary happened to them, but every ordinary is extraordinary, granted, but there's certain things by definition are extraordinary. And Hashem is saying, now I'm going to perform something, an Atik type of performance. This is Kriyas Yamsuf. And there is no, therefore, davening, it's beyond where your davening could reach. Dabel b'nei Yisrael v'so, no prayer. Ve'atem tacharishun, silence. Because this is the expression of Atik, no less. So it says in Kabbalah Chassidus, Leida also comes from Atik. And we could appreciate it on a simple level. It's a different idea. Completely. Totally. So where does the Leida come from? Says the Alter Rebbe, here we see the Keser energy within Malchus, that it's also associated with Leida, which again sourced in the original Keser, which is the higher and deeper level of that Keser, is Atik. So this Malchus also has the idea of the phenomenon of Keser Milmata L'maylo. Let's see it again inside. The fifth line from the bottom, the creation of neshamas from malchus avatzilus lishiyesh that the neshamas become an entity on their own, ba'elam abri, in the world of bria. Because when you show, we know the neshama comes from elam atzilus. Every neshama comes from atzilus. As you see in Perek Beis, in the Kuti Amorim, the first segment, the click away, you can see Perek Beis. I'll tell you about the whole presentation. As the elam and the neshama comes, and that's how Perek Beis famously begins. And which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Al Rebbe says it comes from Chochmah Atzilus. The whole neshama is a manifestation of elam atzilus. Al Rebbe continues in Perek Gimel and Tanya and so on. But where does it obtain the definition of a neshama? There it's still part and included in the Olam Atzilus ambiance, which is all about the Achdus Hashem, the oneness of Hashem. It doesn't become a separate entity called neshama till it comes into Bria. Understandably so, because that's where entity, this separateness, not true separateness. No, Chas v'Shalom. Elam Bria is a holy world, a divine world. Gan Eden Ha'elyon is an Elam Bria. But nonetheless, in comparison to Elam Atzilus, we mentioned so many times, Elam Atzilus is not just a world over Elam Bria, the three world Bria, Yitzir, Asir, or Asir, Yitzir, and even Bria. It's a total different phenomenon. Different phenomenon completely. For the Mosach between Atzilus and Bria, it's a different idea completely. Bria is creation, Atzilus is emanation. It's still part of the Elokus experience. So Neshama comes with it, but where does it identify as a Nivra? Understandably, Elam Bria. And from there it goes from Bria, from creation to formation, to action, and so on, until it invests in the body. Neshama Beguf. In Elam Hazak Gashmi, in this physical world. But where does it establish itself as a Yesh V'Daber Nifred? In Elam Abriya. So Malchus is that transitionary Nikuda where it comes from a part of the Netzal to a Nivra, from emanated spirit, if you will. It's not a Nivra yet, to become a Nivra. That's the idea of Leda in context of Neshama. Leda, birth. Let's remember, birth is connected to Atik because it's coming from a non-Mitzias to a Mitzias, to a separate entity, like the idea of birth physically in this very physical world. So Malchus, in the end of the day, has that kayach to bring about the neshama in Elam Abriya as a Yeshav Davar Nifniviyata. So it's connected in the end of the day to the Atik, which every Leda is connected to Atik. It's also called Leda. It's not the generic Leda we have, a child born in Elam Haz, a physical child born in Elam Haz, but nonetheless, from the state of Atzilus to the state of Bria, that the Neshama becomes a separate entity. Of course, it's called Leda. And if it's called Leda, it has all the accolades of Leda, all the way connected to Atik, which is the only energy which could produce these Mafteiches Apnimis, is the only energy which could produce any type of Leda on any level. An Elam Hazah, if it's the higher worlds, and in this case, from Atzilus to Bria, it's called Leda, like Kriyas Yamsuf, with Ba'atika Talia, this is only dependent on Atik. And what do we infer from here? That Malchus, even though it's the lowest of the Sfiras, it's the 10th, nonetheless, it's called Keser Milmata L'maylo. It has a koyach, which all the other Sfiras do not have. Again, as elaborated in the last week, and again here the Alter Rebbe points this out with this dimension that the Malchus is this which brings about the Neshamas and Elam Abilis Yesh V'Davar B'fnei Atzmon, and it's called Leda. You see how it's connected to the Keser on high, and therefore it's Keser Milmata L'maylo, because no, it's Sefer Mitchilason, the end is wedged into the beginning, and vice versa, the connection of Atik with Malchus. The Rebbe continues, "V'gam kol gidol ha'neshamas kol zayin chadashim yiziv u'kshmini atzeret ha'shvishal pesach hu k'mei gidol zon bebeten emilo." Now the Rebbe points out over here that in the end of the day we see that lineup within the Seder Ishtalshel is even higher than Malchus, which in the end is connected to Keser, Arich, and even higher than Atik. Where the Rebbe says K'mai, let's just jump to the K'mai, we'll get back to the Kol Zayin Chadashim, all the 7 months. So it says that just like in the physical birth of a child, the child is in the womb of the mother for 7 months, but again, it's plus. Usually we know it as 9 months. Tisha Yarchei Leida, but because as the Gemara tells us that by 7 months that a child could be born healthy at 7 months, so therefore the first point is what we're talking about over here, where a child could be born healthy, is the 7 month period, and eventually it says that later even the better. And even though according to the Gemara it says the 7th even better than the 8th. If you look in black and white Gemara, and better yet, of course, if it's the full 9 month term. But you see over here, he says Kol Zayin Chadashim, because that's the first time, the first point when a child could be born healthy, and therefore this idea does not begin over here in this world like everything else. It evolves from the way it's on high. So there's the phenomenon of Zayin Chadashim. We have the Zayin Chadashim, the 7 months from Shmini Atzeres till Shvi Shel Pesach. So it says this is the development of the neshamis in these 7 months from the union of Shmini Atzeres. Because Shmini Atzeres is in Chodesh Tishrei. In Chodesh Tishrei is a month with everything is established in that month as we know it. And that's why we invest so much, starting from Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, Matzah Chaseinu, and then the final day Shmini Atzeres. We know that there's a correlation between all the Yomim Tovim, even though you can definitely compartmentalize. The first are the more the serious, and the second are more the joyous, if you will. But in the end of the day, it's one pattern, like it says in all the Sefirot. Then starting with the Gemara, but Keselim Chagenu, the famous Gemara, as an example. And that's why we invest so much in this month, because this month establishes what is going to unfold through the entire year, individually and collectively, and for that matter, collectively for all of Am Yisrael, for that matter, for the entire world as we know it. And if Hashem gives a whole month of Elul to prepare ourselves, it's a serious month, because it sets forth what is going to transpire in the life of the individual, every individual Yid, and every individual Nivra, created being, if it's a human being or any other created being in Elam Hazeh, and then collectively Am Yisrael, and then all humanity, and then the entire world. Everything is established in that time, in the time of Chodesh Tishrei. So it says that the Shmini Atzeres, there's the union which bring about that birth, which eventually would unfold 7 months later, which is Shvi Shel Pesach, which then is the time of the Leida. And again, Shvi Shel Pesach, we know what is Shvi Shel Pesach, what happened to Shvi Shel Pesach, that's right, this is which we just spoke about. Shvi Shel Pesach is the time when there was the manifestation of Atik, there was the manifestation of this core expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which came to manifestation through Kriyas Yamsuf on Shvi Shel Pesach, which is then there was the Leida. So you have the 7 months from the union of Shmini Atzeres to Shvi Shel Pesach, which by Shvi Shel Pesach you have the actual Leida of these neshamis into Elam Habriya as a Yesh V'Davar, which again would be the Leida, which is the Koach of Malchus, which brings it all about. Thus the connection of Malchus to Atik Yamin, which is again the continuation of what he says before, but he says this phenomenon over what he said before. He said this phenomenon exists even a step higher than Malchus. We know there is Zon. Zon would be Midas and Malchus, which Midas would be Zoh. Remember we just had it before. Zoh would be Ze'er Anpin, literally translated as small faces. Again, this is all Ze'er Kabbalah. This is the Chaf. This is the Pei Chaf we're talking about. So this is the Zoh and Nun. Over there, the last word over here is Zun. It's abbreviation Zoh and Nukva. Literally is the masculine and the feminine. Nukva would be Malchus. Zoh is the midas, the 6 midas. They're called Zoh because they're the Ze'er Anpin, smaller faces again, in comparison, in contrast to the Arich Anpin, that dimension of Keser, which we mentioned before. So there is the Zon. They're also produced eventually as a separate entity of the Zocher and the Nekeva, the midas and the Malchus. Where are they produced? What it carries them? Where was their union? Which eventually you had the masculine contribution and eventually the feminine contribution. Where did that transpire? Yeah, what does Zon follow? The Midas and Malchus follow. Chachma Bina. We know Chachma is called Ab. Bina is called Aim. So the Zon are also Bebet and Aim Eilah in the womb of the supreme Aim, which is, that's right, Bina. And through the union of Chachma Bina, Bina would carry the Zon and develop the Zon, which is the midas and malchus, till they're eventually produced as structured midas and malchus, which usually follow bina, like children. They have the Ava Aim, and then you have the family, the Toldos. The Alter Rebbe has it in the third chapter. You can see the third chapter of Likutei Amorim. The Midas and Malchus eventually as well. Malchus was called the Toldos Chabad. The Toldos, the offsprings of the Chachma Bina. The Chachma be called the Av, Bina called the Aim, and it says in Kabbalah also Chachma is Koyach Ma, the Nekuda, which is again similar to the masculine contribution, while Bina is about expansiveness, and this is identifies with the feminine contribution in the development of the child, 9 months in the womb of the mother. It's about expansive detail and expansiveness and so on. This is exactly tantamount to what we know about Chochma, Chachma, Nekuda, Borok HaMavrik, famously the flash. And then you have the expansion of Bina. Thus, Chochma, the Av, and Bina, the Aim. So Bina carries the Zon, and eventually, till the Zon is lined up as Toldos, as offsprings of Chabad. So this is Gidul Zon and Betel Milah. So it says also the ability of the Bina to carry the Zon comes from Eretz Elyonim Milah. It doesn't start with a Milah itself, Bina. It comes from high and supreme Eretz, energies and light. Milo means much higher than Bina. Milo even higher and yet higher till Ein Sof, till the infinite Leila, which is invest in it in Bina Kol Tesa Zayin Yachid Leida. The 9 here, he does mention the 9 and the 7 of the months of birth. So similar to we find in the by Bina, which carries the Zon, its Toldos, which is connected to very high and supreme kaichas and lights and energy, in order that it should produce healthy zon, if you will. So too, when it comes to malchus, the bria of the neshamis, to establish themselves a yesh v'daber nifrad in elam abri, which is called leida, just like any other leida, which it comes from a very lofty dimensions within a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And again, this comes from atik atalia. This is embedded in Malchus in order to have the success to do so, similar like Bina, which produces the Zoh and the Malchus. And that's what he says. And this is what he comes. He says, so he starts explaining the Bina, that the Bina success comes from a very high and lofty place, which invests in Bina all the 9 or 7 months in order to produce Zon, the Midas and Malchus. So too when it comes to Malchus itself, the creation of the Neshamas and Malachim. To Elam Abriya has in itself also this enormity of the Unhigh, the enormous energy of the Unhigh, to the highest levels of the Unhigh, which is Atik. We'll do another few lines of Ribigam Kalika B'Shei Shati B'Shabeh Mikabels Mizaberes Mizo Himimechin Da'avo Uvechol Ziv Nimshachas Lavo Mi'arichan Pim Ve'atik Yemin Maila Adein Sov. He says even this ability to be successful, he says over here that in the end of the day we know that Chochma Bina, Zoh Malchus, and there's the union of Chochma Bina. And then the Zoh Malchus are in the Betin, in the womb of the Emei Bina, and of course then they become Toldos. And then they have their own union, which is Zoh Malchus, and Malchus is what brings the Leda to the next world. Simple, right? We spoke about it. You can glean it from the previous classes and from today as well. You have the 10 Sefirot, so there is the union of Chochma Bina, which produces the Toldos Zoh Malchus. For that matter, you look in Gimel, that's the way it is by the human being. What we understand and appreciate on an intellectual level, this eventually produces our midas, our focus, our drive, our emotions, our attributes. Depends what we were contemplating, what we were pondering on. But what we establish in our mind, that would establish our attributes, what we're driven to or of. If it's yira, reverence, all depends what we're thinking. Again, you can see it there, and you don't even have to see it in Gimel. We can understand why intellect produces midas, and eventually Malchus, which is Mashava Dibur Maisa, thought, speech, and action. Which again, because it evolves the way things are on high. In Elam Atzilus, you have Ava, which is Chochma Bina. The union of Chochma Bina, that carries, the Bina carries the Zon, Bebeten, Emei La, which means literally translate the womb of the Emei La. Of course, it's figurative, or in the way it is on high, that is. And then it's produced Zon, which is the Zachar Nikeh, which is this again, so to say, the Toldes, or not so to say, the Toldes of Chol, the union of Chochma Bina. Then you have the union of Zah and Malchus. And eventually Malchus would produce, again, Malchus is the feminine, while Zah is the masculine, and Malchus is what carries over and has the ability to be Meili, the Leda, the phenomenon of Leda, is in Malchus, not in Zah, similar like the way it's in Bina, not necessarily in Chochma. Chochma gives the Kayach, like the masculine contribution, but the development of the actual birth and the miracle of birth is, in the end of the day, through the feminine, as we see it evidently as well. So to Bina, in this case Malchus. So Malchus eventually is, again, the first part of what he was saying over here, that it's connected in the end of the day because it's laid to Atik, as we explained. But then he says, don't divide these two unions, because the whole way that Zoh Malchus is able, the union of Zoh Malchus could come to being is because there was a union of Chachma Bina. And the way it is physically. How could there be the propagate, meaning to say the continuation of generations, is when these children grow up and eventually they get married and they have more children. They become the Ava'im. And the reason why it's so below, because that's the way it is from on high. It means that you can't disconnect the success of the union of Zon, which give birth to these Neshamas of Malachim Nel Mabriya, from the original union of Chachma Bina. So within that union of Zon, you also have the energy of the union of Chachma Bina, which is connected to on high, and higher and yet higher, as he says, to Arich Apin and Atik Yamin. So it's another dimension which he brings. In other words, the idea of Leda, the area of Malchus, is also a manifestation of Atik. Because like every Leda is a manifestation of Atik. And he even breaks it down. It happens Shmini Atzeres, this union, and eventually the production is on Shvi Shel Pesach, Leda, Kriyas Yamsuf, Shvi Shel Pesach, as we explained. But he says it's much more than that, because this union of Zon is really connected to the higher union of Chochma Bina, which is connected to the higher and yet higher, as he says, Arich Ampin et Atik Yemen, and even higher than that, Ein Tel Ein Sof. So let's see it in the words of Kochu, B'B'Yis Neshamas Malachim of Begam. Here, Begam, fourth line, Goli K'B'Shisha Tipish Mekabas M'Bavris Mizo. And the whole tipa, meaning to say that this seed which it receives and it's able to become pregnant, so to say, impregnates itself from Zoh, also comes from Meichin de Ava, from the energy of Chochma Bina. Overchol Zivug, in every union, Imshachas Lavo, is drawn to Ava, which is Chochma Bina, from Ari Champin, which is first the lower level of Keser. And he goes from Atik Yemin, that's the Atik we're talking about, which is the deeper level of Keser. And he says in the end of the day, Keser also, this description, Ari Champin, Atik Yemin. Of course, Atik Yemin is connected to the deepest levels of the Kodesh Baruch Hu, but we know that there's even higher and yet higher than that. Umil Maila Adin Sof. And that is transpiring at that time, or that state. So eventually, when Malchus gives birth to these Malachim and Neshamas Abriya, what is unfolding in that Leda is a whole array of, all the way from its higher level prior to it, which is extraordinary, the union of Chochma, Bina, Datzilus, but yet higher yet, Keser, Aricham, Bin Atik Yom, and even higher and higher, all the way up to the Ein Sof. That is what's unfolding at the Leda of these Neshamas into Bria. That's the enormous Kayach of Malchus, the end of the Sefirot, what brings everything home. It says, for example, Moshe is the Shvi, Kol HaShvin Chavivin. Moshe is Vahi B'Shurun Melech. And so too, everything associated with Malchus, with the Shvi, it's not just another link, even though every link, especially we learn these links on high associated with different levels of Atzilus, is beyond what anybody or anything could fathom. Any level could fathom, that is. Because you're talking about the energy of Atzilus. But Malchus has that kayach, that leida, that production of Malchus, because Malchus has that kesem, mata l'mayla, all the way up to the highest level.